Hey y'all, happy Sunday and welcome to this week's live Q&A session. This is the portion of the show where we allow YouTube to send out notifications that we're going live. If you're watching this live Q&A on replay, please scrub ahead until this graphic disappears and the actual show begins. If you're watching live and you have any comments or questions, please go ahead and put them in the live chat. But for now, grab a beverage, sit back, and relax while the countdown timer does its thing. Then we'll get started. Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Looks like we got a full crowd out here already. And oh man, what a week it's been. I got to get out and get me a haircut. Good God, this is getting unruly. Ah, man. Oh, the trials and tribulations. Let's see here. We got a full crowd today. I didn't have a video today. It's a regular open Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, demands for payment, just go ahead and put them in the chat over here. We've already got a couple of questions. Um, but today I kind of want to introduce something new. When in last week's video on just surfacing, flattening a piece of stock on the CNC, I brought up another piece of wood to kind of show what I meant about grain going in every direction. And I got to thinking about that. Make no mistake, I am a major wood nerd and have been for a long time. And there are some things that I have, pieces of material that I've been carting around. Um, I collected in some cases 30 years ago, and I'm waiting for the right project to come along. And I've made a few things with a few woods, and there are some videos here on the channel that have featured some of those woods. But this one piece kind of intrigued me a little bit, and it's this piece of redwood burl. And I wanted to talk a little bit about not only the wood, but maybe get some of y'all's experiences with them if you have used redwood burl before. Uh, Redwood, I'm out on the West Coast, so it's pretty plentiful out here, especially down south of me a little bit. It's used mainly for outdoor woods, uh, things like, well, fences, uh, lawn furniture, patio furniture, things like that. And but up here, we, being in softwood country, we tend to use cedar, whereas down in California and maybe sometimes out in Nevada, Arizona, they're using redwood. Um, Now, everybody, the minute you say redwood, they immediately think giant sequoia, and that's not what we're talking about. There are several subspecies in the redwood family, and we're not talking about the giant sequoias or what have you. Um, when we're talking about this type of redwood, we're talking about some of the subspecies that are really plentiful. They don't get gigantic like these giant sequoias, and they're a very fast growing tree. So they're plantation grown and used a lot for outdoor construction and what have you. But I did a quick little sanding job on this little corner right over here. And I wish you could see the flame off of this chunk of wood. It is just absolutely crazy. Now, what this was, I have no idea. I got this at a local consignment shop we have here in Southern Oregon called American Mercantile. And these were just, a few pieces. There were 6 pieces and they were like $1 each. So I dove on them. And so if you have any experience using redwood burl, I've worked a little bit with it in the past, but if you have any experiences, I'd love to hear about it. Redwood is a very soft wood. It doesn't hold fasteners very well. And by that, I mean like screws and what have you. It will glue up nice. It will hold a nail. But if you're thinking about making like furniture or something like this, you're basically talking about through bolting, drilling through and then bolting it together to keep it together because it doesn't like to hold on to fasteners at all. But it's, as you can see, it's gorgeous stuff. So that's all I wanted to talk about on that. Just kind of showing off a few things that I have and maybe sparking some interest in stepping outside of the box and maybe getting away from some of the things that we're used to using. Um, the amount of the amount of Baltic birch plywood and MDF and things of that nature, even things like cherry and maple and what have you. I mean, they're uh, I won't say they're a dime a dozen, but it's pretty common. But getting folks to kind of look at other materials and stepping, outside of the big box store, um, I think it's worth it. It's something maybe to consider. Feeds and speeds on this you'd have to experiment a little bit with it, but I'm finding that it responds very much like a hardwood like maple. It's not stringy with those real pronounced um, annular rings like pine or something like that is. It's not like that at all. It's a little bit more consistent in its grain structure than some of the other softwoods that we're used to dealing with. So Tim Belt says that would also make some really nice pen blanks. It would. I would stabilize it first. The issue with this particular piece is it is so thin, it is not quite a half inch thick. And I don't know what this was. Yeah, it's no, I take that back. It's right at 5/8 of an inch thick. So you could make slimline pens out of this. But I would stabilize it um, before I did something like that. Takes a finish great too, by the way. So if you live in an area where you can get your hands on some redwood, I mean, I would encourage you to give it a try. I mean, uh, it will it will weather to give you a rustic look if you don't finish it, but it will take a finish very nicely. So, okay, let's go ahead and get to a few questions. I just, it's not going to be a weekly thing. Just every once in a while, I might bring on a piece of material that maybe you hadn't considered and get some opinions on it and see what you think. Okay, let's get started here. Matt Haas over at Awesome Wood Things has a few questions here. Says, I'm profile cutting what is essentially a puzzle piece. My bit broke. Whoops. I replaced it and now the pieces are loose. Would the new bit that's presumably a bit wider because it's brand new do this? Am I crazy? Well, as I said in my reply to you, Matt, you may be crazy, but not because of this. Because the short answer is yes. It may be a little bit bigger in diameter. Um, the thing about the measurements of, let's say, I don't know what size bit it was, so I'm guessing it would be a fairly small bit, like an 1/8 inch diameter. That's a nominal diameter. It may be a little more, it may be a little less. In much the same way, a V bit, like a 90-degree V bit, may be 89 or 91 degrees. So what I would suggest is if you have micrometers available to you, go ahead and measure the actual diameter, the cutting diameter of that bit, and adjust your vectors accordingly. If you don't have a micrometer, if you just have inside outside calipers, you might just cut a groove or a dado into a piece of scrap material and then measure the width of that cut. That'll give you a good cut diameter of that bit, and then adjust your vectors accordingly. Similarly, let me load up Aspire. I haven't even fired it up yet. Similarly, you can use an allowance on some tool paths. Let me get it loaded up here, and then I'll come over here and screen share and make sure we get fired up. We do. Okay, let me just draw a vector out here. We'll just use that. Space bar, close. Come along here. You said you're doing a profile cut, and you want to cut to the outside of this. You can use an allowance offset here. If it's cutting too big, you'll want to use a positive offset. If it's cutting too small, you'll want to use a negative offset. For instance, I'm not going to do any kind of a offset now, and let's go with a 1/8 inch end mill. Boom, select, and I'll go ahead and I'll just calculate that. And I think I'm going to need to lighten up the material here. Is that better? That's better. Okay. And we'll go ahead and we'll preview that and go out here to the 2D view. I'm going to select my tool path, and then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to toggle the solid so that you can see it's cutting so that the edge of that cut is right on that vector. Now, if I were to come in and do an allowance offset, let's say of, I don't know, I'll just pick a number off the top of my head, 5/1000ths of an inch, and it's positive 5/1000ths of an inch, and then calculate it, then come back and look, we can see that now that tool path is 5/1000ths away from that line, technically making the piece slightly bigger. Now, if I go back in and I make that negative 5/1000ths of an inch, then recalculate and come back over to my 2D view, we now see that that is cutting actually 5/1000ths of an inch to the inside of that vector. So there's a balancing act. Basically, with that new bit, you'll need to kind of play with it a little bit in scrap and see exactly what you're getting and what you're cutting. Now, when I say you can take a micrometer and measure that bit and get the actual cutting diameter of that bit, I would basically, if it's a 1/8 inch bit, let's say, um, copy that tool in the tool database and enter the actual diameter and name it accordingly. That way you know that that particular bit isn't cutting 0.125, it's cutting 0.123 or whatever it is. But this allowance offset is available. Let me go ahead and close this and zoom back out. And come back up here. The allowance offset is in the profile tool path. It's in the pocket tool path. Where is it? It's called the pocket allowance. And I believe that's it. I don't think it's in the V-carve tool path. No, it's not. The V-carve tool path is just going to cut to the vectors. I don't know if it's is it in the inlay tool path? Well, I don't want to get involved in that yet. It may or may not be in the inlay tool path. I think it is on the female side. So, and in fact, well, this is not my idea. Believe me, this is not my idea. I picked this up from Peter Pasuelo. There is a link to his channel down in the description of all of my live streams. Well, for about the last 20 live streams, there's a link to Peter Pasuelo's channel and Michael Mazalik's channel in the description of all of my live streams. He has a video on checking the angle of your V-bits, and he gives away the free file for you to go ahead and check the angle, because I had some issues with my V-bits and basically put one of my 90-degree V-bits was not 90 degrees. It was 89 degrees. And so I was getting a little bit of artifacting in the corners. Well, he has a video over on his channel, and I'm talking about Peter Pasuelo, his channel CNC Nuts, that shows how to use these files to actually check the angle of your bits. And I had to come in and change the angle of one bit and create an 89-degree V-bit that would make it cut accurately. So that's where I got that idea from. Hey, I'm willing to bet you that a 1/4 inch end mill or a 6 millimeter end mill is not exactly cutting 6 millimeters because it's not actually 6 millimeters in diameter. So measure the bit. Now, for woodworking, this usually doesn't mean anything. But in your case, where you're doing something like a puzzle, it means everything because now the pieces won't fit together right. So it's worth getting in on it, getting in there and checking it out. Now, Martin Pearson says there's a sticky post on the Vectric forum as well with the file for V-bit angles. Yes. I don't know if Peter posted that or if somebody else posted that. Now, I know Peter didn't come up with this idea either. And he credits the person who gave him the idea for checking these V-bit angles. And I don't know if it's the same person or not, but definitely. And just I'll say it straight up. If you're not subscribed to Peter Pasuelo, you need to be. I learned so much from that man. It's not even, I can't even quantify how much I learned just in normal CNC operation when I was first getting started. He's not very active anymore. He's extremely busy with work, but he knows what he's talking about, and he's very, very good. I learned a lot from him. So I hope that answers your question, Matt, and I hope it helps you out. So let's see. Peter Van Vliet says, is it possible to do a horizontal cut into the perimeter of a workpiece with a slot cutting bit, moving only horizontal increments? I'm guessing a profile toolpath with lead in, but wasn't sure. The short answer is yes. I haven't done it yet, but it's something I want to explore, but I have seen it done. Um, the the thing is, you have to get that bit placed vertically in Z axis in the right place, well off of the material, and then move into it and make the cut. One problem that you're going to run into is finding an arbor and a blade that will survive those high speeds, because I don't know if you're using a router or a spindle, but no matter which one you're using, unless your spindle is capable of slowing way, way down to somewhere between 2 and 3,000 RPM, it may be difficult to find an arbor and blade or even a bit, a slot cutting bit that's rated for these higher RPMs, because saws and router bits are completely different things. So the potential is there to do some damage to the material, to the saw, to the bit. But I have seen it done. Now, I don't have a huge super industrial machine with a big spindle that's capable of running 2,000 RPM. I think the minimum I can run on this is, I don't remember off the top of my head if it's 6,000 or 8,000. So I might be able to get away with doing something like that. As I said, it's something I'm going to explore down the road. Maybe this year, maybe not. I don't know. But the short answer is yes, I know it can be done because I've seen it done. I'm just not certain on the tooling that they used for that. So I hope that answers that question. But again, practice and scrap and be very, very careful. Find You're either going to have to slow down your spindle to its minimum, or find a slot cutting bit that's capable of doing what you want it to do at higher RPMs. So, um, thoughts flash off and on in my brain, and I've thought about a few things like that. Years ago, when I was first getting involved in CNC, I saw a video of a guy who had arranged a, it looked to me, for all intents and purposes, it looked like a sewing machine motor off to the side, mounted to the side of his spindle, mounted low down on the side of his spindle. And it had a small, maybe, I don't know, maybe an 2-inch diameter blade on it. And he was using it to cut fret slots in a fretboard. So you can imagine how thin that blade was. We're talking about something around uh, 22 to 23 thousandths of an inch. Let me see what that is in metric. In millimeters is, we're looking at right around a half a millimeter. So it's like, wow. So, yeah, Matthew Despaw says, I'm in the shop, just installed a spindle. It's so weird to hear anything over the CNC now with the router. Couldn't hear myself think. Oh, big time. Big time. The loudest thing in my shop right now, until that bit touches wood, is the dust collector. Dwayne Ruthig says a thread cutting toolpath and key slot are examples of horizontal cutting. Exactly. And an excellent point. If you're doing, Peter, if you're doing something that, like trying to get an angular cut along an edge, a thread mill will do it. Thread cutting end mill. If you're looking for a straight side, like you want to put a spline in something, if you're looking for straight sides, then you'd look for slot cutting. But yes, it can be done. The hard part would be finding the right tooling. Something that I found when it comes to searching for tooling is just not knowing the name of something. If you don't know to look for a thread mill, how are you going to find it? You know, it's so sometimes just nomenclature can be an issue. Let's see. I would mimic the small incremental movements of the vertical cup depths by having multiple profile tool paths, each with a different lead-in depth, which would minimize the cutter router impact. That's legit as well. It's just like I said, finding the tooling would be the hardest part. The tool pathing would be fairly straightforward, and you'd have to experiment a little bit with you'd have to experiment a little bit with feeds and speeds, because you know and a lot of these, also think about a lot of these tools, slot cutters and what have you, are made from metal. So wood's going to be different, but any feeds or speeds they recommend are probably going to be from metal. So it's just something to think about. Oh, let's see here. Let's see. Okay, we've got another one for Matt Haas with Awesome Wood Things. What are reasonable expectations regarding the tolerance of a lead screw type CNC, not rubber band type? For example, should you expect 1 thou tolerance as a profile cut makes several passes? There are a lot of variables involved in that, Matt. For instance, how hard you're pushing the bit, because bit deflection is a very real thing. Um, it, it's you may not ever see it, and if you're using solid carbide bits, you probably won't. but you will get a little bit of side flex or front to rear flex as you're pushing a bit if you're trying to push it too hard. It's not pushing hard enough to break it, but just enough to deflect it slightly. And that has happened to me. You just gotta, and that's why I run conservative feeds and speeds. I'm not out to win races, um, but you can expect 1 thou tolerance. Um, but something I have found is what I tend to use. Let me go back over here to Aspire, and let me back out of here. On a profile toolpath, what I tend to do is I use a separate last pass with an allowance of 10 thousandths of an inch. What that does is, in fact, let me go ahead and just let me close this and I'll do a simple, let me delete this, come back over here, and we'll delete that vector. Hello, delete it. And I'll do a simple rectangle. Now I'll come back and do a profile for that. Cut all the way through. Z equals, and we'll do it on the outside. No offset allowance. Okay, now if we look at, let's reset the preview, get rid of that. Now if we look at the toolpath, what it's going to do, and this is pass depth is way too small, it's going to come over and it's going to start cutting all the way down in several steps. Then the last step, whoops, I forgot to set my separate last pass. 1. All right, there we go. Now let's do it. Okay. It'll come around to this side here. Zoom out. And the bit is going to make several passes to get down to the last pass. Then it will lift up and then move in that allowance of 10 thousandths. So these first several passes, it will be cutting oversize. Then the last pass, it'll lift out of the material, then plunge back in on the actual size, and then make a cut, cutting the entire depth in one pass. That will help as far as that is concerned. That'll help as far as the undersize, oversize is concerned. But basically, that's what I do on just about every profile toolpath, is to help get rid of that, the possibility of that bit deflection. So, and that help. Let's see. Let's see here. Should you insert a bit as far as the project will allow to into the collet to minimize deflection? Yes, to a point. But there's something to be careful of. Let me go grab, do I have a bit I can show you on? Yeah, this one will work. If you're talking about a straight, like a upcut or downcut spiral end mill, um, push it in into the collet, but don't get any of the cutting flutes up into the collet because that'll just tear up your collet. So put as much of that shank in there as you can, but on a bit with a larger head such as this, let's see if it'll focus. Will you focus? Yeah. Can you see where the shank meets that cutter head? There's a radius there. You want that collet, you want a little bit of space up in here. So if you put this into the collet to about so, you're fine. If you're out here, you're in trouble. But you don't want that collet to grab hold of that radius because that will loosen up. So it will that's when you're asking for trouble because you're trying to grab that radius, you're not grabbing hold of the shank. I did a video on how much bit goes in the collet, and I just wrote myself a note. I'll put a link to it down in the description of this video as soon as we're done. Now, Eyal brings up a good point. His bits actually have a line drawn on them showing how deep you should insert them into the collet. Some do, some don't. I've seen a lot of people over the years in Facebook groups and things like that. If you look at the shank of some bits, you'll see what looks like a sideways letter K, a straight line, and then, it looks like a letter K. If you look at this, why'd they put a K? Are they telling me it's kosher? What's going on here? That's not a K. That's a line with an arrow pointing to that line. That's the minimum depth that should go into the collet. So you should put that shank until you no longer see that K. As I say, it's not a letter K. It's a line with an arrowhead pointing at it. Not every bit manufacturer does that. Some of them do. A Mana is one of those that does have what looks like that letter K. Some white side bits do, some don't. I wish they all would do it, but that's one of those things that you got to kind of get used to, you know. Let's see here. But yes, I'll link that video as soon as we're done here. Let's see here. My buddy Russ Tyndall, just a little ways south of me, about 2.5 hours, something like that. Mark, do you know an easy way to rerun a toolpath in Mach 4 that is contained in one code file consisting of multiple toolpaths? Seems as though I scroll forever searching. Yeah, you're not the first person that's asked me that, Russell. To be honest, the easy way is to get back into vcarve and save G-code for that file and be done with it. There's no real way of searching that G-code file unless you want to load the G-code file in like Notepad and scroll down and find the line number and then search for that line number in or go to that line number in Mach 4. I don't have, let me see, I don't have any G-code on this computer, and I don't have a thumb drive out here with any G-code on it to show you. You can search for a line number, and it's just finding that line number. If you know what line of G-code that file starts with, you can search for that line number and start from here. But generally speaking, I mean, I know it's too late after the fact. That's why I put most of mine into separate files. Not all. It depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll combine 3 or 4 different tool paths into one G-code file if they're all using the same bit. But generally speaking, I tend to put them in separate files. But if you can load up that G-code file in Notepad, find that line number where it starts, you can go into Mach 4 and search for that line number and start from here. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. IL says that would depend on what created the G code. Some programs would leave comments when they merge several tool paths together in a single G-code file. Yeah, and that's why I wish I had some G-code here that demonstrates that, because the way I think Cut2D does it this way too. I'm not sure, but I would assume so, because I know in VCarve and Aspire, at the beginning of every separate tool path, there is a comment that there is a comment in parentheses that says such and such tool path, and then I believe the bit that's used on that tool path. So that's one way of doing it, is to get into Notepad and search for the parentheses, and then just keep find next until it gets down to that line number that starts that G-code file that you're looking for. Then run from here. I'll get into that. It's too late. It's too late to do it this time, because the next week's video is already edited, and I'm doing closed captioning and stuff on it. But I'll try to add that into another video. So Dwayne Ruthig says, doesn't the first line of a tool path have a G0 command that could be searched? I don't know if that's the case. I don't know. It may. Like I said, I don't have a piece of G code here to load in and go through. I will put one in, and maybe we'll talk about this next week as part of unfinished business. I can't say yes and I can't say no. I just don't remember. But excellent point. But you should be able to search the G code for, if nothing else, for parentheses to find that next bracketed comment. And then look for the first line of that G code and use that line number and do a run from here. See, Rick French says, I was taught to get the end of the bit as close as possible to the end of the splines on the collet without hitting the shoulder of the bit. Yes. And also without getting those cutting flutes into the collet. I think I can grab, yes, I've got my 1/4 inch collet, and let's get a ba-boom, a down cut spiral bit, and can see if it'll focus. Come on, there we go. You can see where those cutting flutes are. That's about how far I would go. I would not get those. I would not get those cutting flutes into that collet. And by the same token, when it comes to this bit here, want to get down there fairly close. Come on. Come on, focus. You can do it, camera. I've got a new camera coming. It just didn't get here in time. Come on. There we go. Don't want that radius down into those collet flanges. So, oh man. Yeah, it's because again, if you grab hold of that radius, it's just going to slip, and then you have trouble. Because even if you have your spindle turned way down, let's say 12,000 RPM, now you've got a loose piece of metal, nice and sharp and pointy, I might add, spinning at 12,000 RPM that could go in any direction. And you don't want a projectile going that fast. Believe me. Lewis Denton says, is there a video on V-carving text? No, there are a bunch of videos on V-carving text. Okay, very small text. Um, the the thing with small text is it's going to really depend on a number of things. I haven't got a video on doing small text, but I do plan on one project that I know I'm going to be V-carving some very small text, and I'll be using my 15-degree V-bits on that. So basically put, when it comes to V-carving very, very small text, uh, is gently, very gently, for two reasons. Number one, a lot of these real steep angled bits, like 15-degree and what have you, are very delicate. And like I've got a couple here, they come to almost a needle point, to the point to where I stab myself with one, pulling it out of the collet. Pulling it out of the package. My hand kind of jumped like that and stabbed me, and I bled like a stuck hog for about a half hour. Um, the the other thing to remember is chip out and tear out, because that tip is going to is going to cut nice and clean, but when you have an interior piece like the center of the letter P or an R or a small A, it's very possible for that piece to just go flying and be gone. And depending upon the wood that you're carving, some woods react better than others. MDF is horrible when it comes to that, in my experience. Now, maybe I'm using the wrong MDF, uh, but generally speaking, be conservative with the speeds and feeds. Be real conservative. Yes, low speeds and low depth of cuts. The low depth of cut thing is, if you're V carving, you have less control over that than if you're pocketing or something like that. It's more to do with feed rates than it is depth of cut, because the more passes it takes to get down to that depth, the more opportunities that bit has of knocking that piece loose. So you want to try to kind of get it in and out of there with minimal contact. I don't know. This is hard to describe but easy to show. So I do plan on doing a video on this down the road. I have one project where, as I say, I need to carve some fairly small text, but it doesn't have to be super deep, because believe me, if you have some text that's, let's say, a quarter of an inch tall or 3 millimeters tall, um, and you're using a 15-degree V-bit, it's not going to carve very deep at all. So your depth of cut is not really an issue. So Brooks Martin is suggesting maybe pre-finishing with an oil. That might help. Um, it really depends on the project and what the material is. For instance, if I was going to be V-carving into this redwood burl like I was talking about, I would stabilize it first. And because what that does is that firms up the material and it's less likely to break off. And um, the density of the wood does have something to do with it, but less than you might think, because brittle woods, or excuse me, dense woods like maple will break out small pieces just as easy as a softwood like pine or cedar will. So it's more to do with impact than anything else. So Martin Pearson says sanding sealer helps as it binds the fibers together. Yeah, it does. It does. So, but again, it depends on what kind of finish you're going to be doing on it. You know, if you're going to be doing a something like a lacquer or a polyurethane or something like that, then pre-finishing may be a good a good option. If you're going to be painting it, jury's still out as to whether or not paint will actually penetrate enough to do anything. Um, so, let's see here. Um, see here. There was a question here about using clamps. Um, oh, come on. Okay, Larry Giving says, are all feeds and speeds different to machine or by brand? Yes. Uh, well, yes, to a point. For instance, my Avid CNC is capable of cutting depths and feed rates that my old Gatton CNC just was not capable of doing because of the machine, the drive system. My Gatton CNC was lead screw driven, and the motors just could not spin fast enough to move that gantry as fast as this Avid rack and pinion will. My max rapid rate on my Gatton CNC was 200 inches per minute. Well, that's fine because I didn't need high speed. I'm not cutting out cabinets or I'm not in production. The rapids on this, I have it turned down to 600 inches per minute. Yeah, I can do 1,000 inches per minute, but it scares the bejeebers out of me. So, you know, no, no thanks. So, okay, people were discussing clamps. Now, Matt Haas has one here. Says, should I buy a new MacBook Pro? No, it's not a CNC question. Just want Mark's thoughts so I can justify the purchase. You're asking the wrong guy. I'm not a Mac person. I'm a PC guy. So, yeah, I I find it hilarious, and I get it. It's personal preference. You like the uh, Mac operating system, great. Um, but what I find hilarious is people are so resistant to jump ship. You have folks who are Mac faithful. I get it. But they get their brand new Mac and then they go through 15 hoops to get their Mac to run a Windows program when it's just as easy to save a ton of money, buy an inexpensive PC to run that Windows program and be done with it. I mean, for the price of that new MacBook, you could buy a couple of PCs to run vCarve or Aspire. And, it doesn't need a huge amount of computer to run vCarve or Aspire. I know I did it. So, yeah, you can. I mean, if you want. I'm not giving you a blessing to go out and get you a MacBook, but if that's what you want, get it. You know. Rob Sandstrom says, just bought a MacBook Pro and I'm using Parallels to run my Vectric software. Both Aspire and VCarve Pro, no problem so far. Yeah, a lot of people have a lot of good luck with running it that way. But you know, I just, I to me, it's like buying a Camaro and then fixing it up to look like a Mustang. Why don't you just buy a Mustang and be done with it? You know. So yeah. Okay, David Pingle says, putting a 1/8 inch bit in the collet lately, I have a difficult time hand tightening it so it will not fall out before using wrenches. I use a Makita and can't hold it in while I tighten with 2 wrenches. Collets do wear out. There is a company, I will link them in the description, um, called Elair Corporation. And in fact, I'll go ahead and I'll put the name. Um, I put it over here in the chat, and I'll put a link to them down in the description box of this video as soon as we're done live here. The company is called Elair Corporation, and they make collets they supply Collets for, oh, countless routers and spindles. I used them. I bought 1/8 inch and 3/8 inch collets and 6 millimeter collets for my Porter cable router. And they're very reasonable. I think the most expensive collet I bought was $18. They're not expensive at all. And I do know they have Makita collets. I know they have oh my gosh, DeWalt, Bosch. Uh, oh boy, they've got collets at Porter Cable, uh, brands I've never heard of. So if yeah, if collets do wear out, and something else that doesn't get talked about a lot. Now I know this is an ER20 collet, but if you look up there at the top of that collet, where those grooves are, where those slots end, those can over time start developing cracks. So you do need to inspect your collets, keep them clean. Personally, when I'm done with a collet for the day, I take it out of the spindle. I don't leave a collet in overnight. And at minimum, I blow it out with compressed air. And then it goes into a holder in my drawer over there. But check your collets every once in a while because they can start to crack and they do have a lifespan. And that may be it. It may just be getting worn out. So, okay. I use both Mac and Windows. Well, then there you go. Rick French says, rest the bit on top of a large car wash sponge to free up both hands while tightening bits. Okay, if you need to. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's viable. I don't know if you've noticed in some of my videos, you'll see it, some of them you won't. I have an old dead mouse pad that use. I throw it down on the material underneath the bit when I'm putting a bit in or taking a bit out because I've dropped bits and broke the tip of them. So that mouse pad is a little bit of a cushion there. And I could see where a car wash sponge would actually be a better thing because it could. You're right, Rick. It can hold that bit in place while you're tightening it up. Let's see. Lewis Denton says, "Have a spare collet on hand. I had to stop work for a week when my collet went south." Um, I I I I agree with that. I just haven't practiced that myself, with one exception. I had two half-inch collets and quarter-inch collets for my Porter cable, but only because I had two Porter cable routers and they both came with half-inch and quarter-inch collets. So it was handy because I could put a V-bit in one collet and a spiral end mill in the other collet. And then when it was time for a tool change, just real quick swap it out. But having a backup on hand, especially if it's if it's got some time on it, if it's got some use on it, another collet is a good thing to have. Um, for cleaning collets, there are specialized cleaners for bits and collets. I find good old isopropyl alcohol, and I use 91%. This is $3-4, and I'll pour some in a little. I tend to use the cap off of a can of spray paint. I'll pour some into that cap and then just kind of get in with an old toothbrush and scrub up the collet, blow it off with compressed air, and then dump the alcohol back in the jug. It works great. There are specialized cleaners that will also lube the threads on the collet and what have you. But collet maintenance and bit maintenance, cleaning and care is pretty important because again, if when you've got a piece of metal spinning that fast, you don't want it to come loose. So, you know, um, take a little bit of time. And like I say, I take the collets out of the spindle and always have the when I'm done with them for the day. I think I've told the story before about leaving a collet in a router on a router table at the cabinet shop over the course of a weekend and then went to go get that collet out. The collet came out just fine, but I had to drive the bit out of the collet with a hammer and a brass rod. So, I just find it's easier to take it out right now when I'm finished with it, clean everything up, and be done with it. It takes 5 minutes. So, okay, let's see. Holy cow, we've been on for an hour. Awesome Wood Thing says, you'll be happy to know I bought a ThinkPad for my VCarve app. Well, there you go. There you go. Perfect. But if you're looking for me to justify you, wait a minute, Matt. Hold on. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You're a YouTube guy. Are you buying a MacBook for your video editing software? Huh? That may be a justification, but for VCarve, Vectric, it's not necessary. But if you're looking to up your video editing game, all right. Yes, video work. I don't know anything about Macintosh. I really don't. But if you're going to be doing video work, go for the best GPU and the best video card you can afford, because that opened up a whole new world to me. And the gaming PC I bought that I do my video editing on, uh, it came with, it's older now, it's about 3 years old, but it was an NVIDIA GeForce 1070 video card, which is not very high speed by today's standards, but it was light years ahead of what I was doing before with my old PC with the integrated graphics card. And videos that would take 45 minutes to render now take about 7. And if I upgraded that card, uh, it would take even less than that. So yeah, for video editing, focus on the graphics card. Um, yeah, max it out in RAM as well. I got mine maxed out in RAM as well. But that graphics card, that video card did more for video rendering than any RAM or uh, any other kind of an upgrade. So, okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Next week will be creating and calculating tool paths to finish surfacing the slab that's no longer there. It's in the house. And you're here watching this. I'm going to give you a little bit of fair warning. You'll notice lighting has changed a little bit in here. I'm playing a little bit with the lighting because I got a new camera and I'm using the old camera for close-up work on the CNC, and the exposures don't really match. So there's a little bit of video ugliness is what I'm getting at. But that'll finish up this mini series, and we'll do a Q&A next week, and I will dig into that question in unfinished business. I'll have to scroll back up here and write down that question. And I believe it was the G code question. I will bring some G code out that has multiple tool paths in it, and we'll go through it and we'll check it out for a good way to search for G code, and search for individual tool paths within G code. All right. Other than that, channel members. Tomorrow, I think I have something everybody will be interested in. Here's hoping anyway. If you are a big time supporter, I do hope you will join us tomorrow so we can talk kind of backstage in the green room about a little project I've got going on. If you don't, I completely and totally understand. If you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about and you'd like to become a channel member or just get some information on it, click the join button down next to the subscribe button. A panel will pop up and a video will play. It'll tell you about channel membership. We have an excellent crowd. We do a live stream every Monday at 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. We've got a good crowd of some very, very talented people that come in and share their experiences and expertise. We just have a real good time. I've had a couple of guests on from the membership that have just done some amazing projects. Um, and you guys out there in the chat, you know who I'm talking about. Uh, so hope to see you then next week. Regular live Q&A on finishing up that slab. Yeah, that's it. Go do something cool. Go make some chips. Go have some fun. I mean, 3-day weekend for a lot of y'all. Get back out in the shop. What are you hanging around with me for? Y'all take care. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Have a good one, y'all.